Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nedarim, daf Yudalid. Today's daf is sponsored by Art Gould for the refuah shlema of his wife, Carol Robinson, Karina Gola Bat Huda. This is dedicated to the healing of my beloved wife and in gratitude to our Hadran family for all the notes and messages of support and in general, just holding us in their hearts as we go through this difficult period. Okay, we're going to get started now. There's a study guide. You can use it to help. There's charts that'll help organize things. Just to remind you, we started the second chapter. The second chapter starts off with all sorts of languages of a vow that are not vows. Elu mutarim. That means if you say this language, nothing's forbidden to you because it's not the language of a neder. So we've discussed this already for the last few days. It's not a neder if I do what we call hatpasa. I attach it instead of to a davar hanadur, a vowed item, that would actually be a valid vow, to either a davar hamutal, first example in the Mishna, chulin shel halacha. It's non-sacred items. That's what chulin is. So non-sacred obviously is permitted to anyone, which means it wouldn't be forbidden. It would be a permitted item, which basically saying, this will be to me like a permitted item. Of course, that's going to be permitted. Then we have kibasar chazir and all the other examples of forbidden items that also it doesn't apply to. That came out of a drasha from the pasuk. We'll see the drasha again today and discuss it a little bit further. Where we left off was the Gemara basically asked the following question. It says chulin shel halacha in the Mishna. Now the assumption is this is very obvious. You don't need to tell me chulin shel halacha, like this is like chulin, all the food that I'll eat from you. Of course that's permitted. Chulin is permitted. Of course my statement means it's permitted. She doesn't really need to tell you that. So the assumption is, the reason why they're telling you this is to tell you that if you said though instead, la chulin, which would mean, as we've already learned, lo chulin, it is not a chulin what I eat of yours, meaning na chulin is equal to korban. It's a sacrifice. Then it would be forbidden. To which the Gemara says, who does this Mishna go like? If it's Rabbi Meir doesn't hold that that's forbidden because Rabbi Meir holds you can't say, we can infer from the negative the positive. So you can't say lo chulin is equal to korban and it's forbidden. We don't do that according to Rabbi Meir. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, we already had the Mishnah where we ended yesterday by quoting it, and Yudam a bed at the bottom that said if you say la chulin shel halacha asul, in which case there's no point to bring it up in this mission. It's obvious that this is mutar. And if you want to derive, well, maybe it's coming to teach you that if you don't say chulin, but you say la chulin, it'll be forbidden. Rabbi Yehuda already taught us that in the Mishnah on Yudam Bet, in which case the Gemara has to explain why it's here. So in the end, they're going to side with Rabbi Yehuda and bring two different reasons as to how to read it according to Rabbi Yehuda, because for sure it doesn't make sense according to Rabbi Meir. To which they say, I did the katane basar chazir kavodat kochavim lahachi katane chulin. Since it said basar chazir, the truth is maybe I'm wrong in saying that you have to say it's Rabbi Yehuda. You basically, because you could basically say where it's not really there for the inference. So the truth is it could really match with either one of them. So now they say, so why is it here? It's here not really so that you can derive la chulin shel halacha is forbidden. Maybe you don't derive that at all, in which case it could really work with Rabbi Meir also. But why is it here? Because it said kibasar chazir, because it said kavodat kochavim, and it gave all these, right? Notice the first words of the Mishnah. This is really the obvious explanation. Elu mutarin, right? What's mutal? Either davar mutar or davar asul. So since it was listing all the davarim asulim, where if you connect it to that, you attach your neder to a davar, a forbidden item, it's not going to be a neder. They also happen to list also if you attach it to permitted item, even though really it's pretty unnecessary. But Mishnah often repeat, right? They said if it's davar nadur, that was last chapter. Now it's going to give you all the davar asur or davar mutal. So since it was listing those that listed this as well. Ravina Amar, second explanation, which we're going to actually reject, hachi katane ve'elu mutarin kechulin kibasar chazir kavodat kochavim. It doesn't, don't read it the simple reading. Elu mutarin, 1, chulin shel halach, 2, kibasar chazir shel halach, 3, kavodat kochavim. No. It starts with kibasar chazir. That's number 1. What's kechulin? What's chulin? It's like I said, if I say kibasar chazir and I attach my vow to a forbidden item, it's just like I said a permitted item, okay? Right? Even though you might have thought, what? If I didn't tell you it's like chulin, if I say something to me is like chulin, then obviously I can eat it entirely without any problem. But if I say something is forbidden to me like pig's meat, then already, even though we learned it's not a vow, maybe it's not a vow by Torah law, but maybe it would be a vow by rabbinic law. And maybe I would need to get what we call a she'elat chacham. I would need to go to a chacham and say, listen, blah, 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 give my reasons, and then he'd undo the vow, just to be strict. So therefore, it tells you chulin to teach you, it's just like chulin. You don't need anything. Okay, so again, let's read it inside. Ravina says what it's trying to teach you. Achi katani, this is how you read the Mishnah. Elu mutarin ke chulin. So you have to change the words a little. It's not Elu mutarin chulin she'ochalach kibasar chazir. You'd have to say Elu mutarin ke chulin she'ochalach, as if you said chulin she'ochalach. And then they start listing kibasar chazir. You'd have to basically add a kaf. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. That's assuming, okay, and then it says kibasar chazir, kavadak kochavim. Gemara says, wait, ilo tanachulin. The presumption of this answer, or the assumption of this answer, is that if I didn't have the word chulin, you would have gotten confused. If I said elu mutarin, kibasar chazir, kavadak kochavim, etc., mutal, you might have thought that mutar means it's not a neder, but you have to get a she'elat chacham. Now that doesn't make any sense if you look at the Mishnah as a whole. Why? So the Gemara is questioning that assumption that we made. You assumed if we didn't have chulin hava mina, you would have thought by a she'elah that you would need to undo the vow. Could you possibly have thought that this would be the case? Of course not. Because look at the Sefer, Hamid Katane Sefer from the end of the Mishnah. If you remember, what did it say there? Ha'omer li'ishto, if you say to your wife, Haaretz alai ki'ima, you're forbidden to me like your mother, like my mother is. Potchim lo petach mimakom achel. And what did we explain there? It means on a Torah level, this is not a vow because it's a davar ha'asul, forbidden item. But by rabbinic law, the rabbi said, I'd even say the end of the Mishnah is shelo yakel v'sholekach. We don't want people to make these kind of nedarim, right? We brought two explanations. Either we just don't want to encourage husbands to speak like this to their wives. It's almost, I would say, abusive kind of language. And by the way, likewise, the reverse. Women shouldn't do the same thing to their husbands. Or because it's so common that we're worried that if he says it like this, he might one day say it in a way that it works, like a davar nadul, and then he'll think it's not valid and he doesn't need a petach, and then he'll actually be stuck and he won't realize. So either which way, the main point is this whole idea of we have to be strict and make them do a petach, come up with a way to undo the vow by rabbinic law is mentioned in the second part of the Mishnah. Michlal, from there you can infer, from there it's obvious that the first part doesn't need it. Otherwise they would have said it on the first part as well. They only say it specifically on this case with the husband and the wife, which again we explained because maybe it's more common. That was one explanation. So we didn't give other explanations, but that was one explanation we saw, which is it's just much more common for husbands and wives to vow like that to each other out of a moment of anger, and therefore they required. But they didn't require it in the first part, which means even if you didn't have the word chulin, you wouldn't have thought that you need to do she'elah on a rabbinic level, and therefore ela mechuvarta chulin mimela nasba. Therefore, it seems like we're going to go back to the first answer. The chulin was just there because it was listing, right? Last chapter was what counts as a neder. This is what doesn't count as a neder. And davar mutar is just one of those things, even though it's quite obvious, we're going to say it anyway. And even though the inference was already inferred from the previous chapter, but still, often the Mishnah repeats things, even if it's not necessarily necessary. Right? It's more like the Mishnah likes to organize things. Here's your list of forbidden, here's your list of permitted, and move on. Now the Gemara says, Minna hanemili. Where do we get this whole idea from that it has to be davar hanadul, that in order, right, if you're matpis, attach your, right, you want to say this item is forbidden to me like this, then it has to be something that was vowed. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Ish ki yidor neder la Hashem, a person who makes a vow to God, Yidor neder is double language, ad sheyidor b'davar hanadol, until you make a neder with another vowed item. We've seen this already at least 5 times. Ihachi, to which the Gemara finally asks a question, but wait, if that's this case, now we never really continued on in the verse. What does the verse say after this? So, ishki yidor neder l'Hashem, o ishavah shvua, or you take an oath, le'esur isar al nafsho, to forbid a forbidden, right, to make something forbidden to yourself. So notice the language, lashon of isur, forbidden, to which the Gemara says, if you're going to darshan yidor neder, why don't you darshan le'esur isal and say hachi afilu b'davar ha'asur nami? Then maybe, yeah, yidor neder is coming to say b'davar hanadol with a vowed item, but le'esur isal might be coming to include also if you made it on a forbidden item, and then it would be forbidden. It would be a neder actually. So what does the Gemara say? They kind of leave us a little bit open here, but they say le'esur isal. Right, and then they say, right, sorry, I didn't read the sentence inside the haktiv, as it says in the verse, le'esul isal nafsho, to forbid this to yourself. To which they say, no, le'esul isar mebayle l'chidetanya. Those words are needed for some other drasha, as appears in a braita, ezehu isar ha'amor b'torah v'chulei, and they actually don't tell us what the braita says, which is very strange, but they say this braita is needed for a different drasha. The Ran, luckily for us, fills in the gap, the missing details here. So if you look at the Ran, right where the lines get wide in the Ran, they're very wide. At the end of that line, it says, Mitbai l'chedetanya ezu isal, and he tells us what it says. Lashme'ina, and it comes to teach you, le'esor isal. Okay, there's 2 ways you could have a neder. The classic neder we've talked about is korban. I say, this is like a sacrifice. Now, a sacrifice means an animal that was forbidden to me because it was designated as a sacrifice. The animal is forbidden not only to me, but to everybody. So therefore, they say like this, le'esur isal al nafsho, to oneself, comes to include apagav detali nidro b'neder shelo ne'asar ela lo lebado. There's 2 categories of a neder. One is something that's forbidden to everybody, like a korban, and one is something that's forbidden only to me. Like we had that case, he's actually going to quote it, Dahainu Yom Shemet Bo Aviv. If you say, like the day of my father's yahrzeit, where I declared upon myself a neder not to eat meat and drink wine, so that would be learned from le'esur isar al nafsho. Tilav haikrat, you didn't have that. Hava amina, you might have thought, Yidor neder ad shiador b'davar nador legamre. When it would say just neder, you might have thought it's davar nador, something that's vowed and forbidden to everybody, like the classic case of korban. Comes le'esor isal nafsho, and maybe specifically because the end of that verse, that phrase is to oneself. Le'esor isal is if it's forbidden specifically to you only by a vow, then it also counts. So basically, both are coming to teach you davar nador, 2 types of davar nador. That's what le'esor isar comes to teach, in which case it's not going to teach us davar asur, an actual forbidden item that's not included. Now we're moving on to part 2 of the Mishna. So now the Gemara is going to bring a contradiction from a braita. Like the flesh of my mother, which is the same thing. You're forbidden to me like I can't have relations with my mother. Like I can't have relations with my sister. Both are what we call a forbidden item, clearly, or totally different category, but also items that are forbidden to benefit from. Ki orla ukikilea keren. Orla is the fruits for the first 3 years once you plant a tree, which are forbidden to benefit from. And kilea kerem are cross, right? When you have a kerem, a vineyard that crosses over into the produce, the tfuah, the grains, things growing in the ground, they create a crossbreed, you can't benefit from that. So now they say, if you say any of those 4 languages, lo amar klum. Lo amar klum sounds like you don't need she'elat chacham. And our Mishna said you need she'elat chacham. So again, we're going to have 2 explanations. This time Abaye and Rava. Amar Abaye, lo amar klum midoraita, b'tzarich she'ela mid'rabanan. The braita we quoted was only talking about on a Torah level. On a Torah level, lo amar klum, it's not a neder. Comes our Mishna to tell you, but on a rabbinic level, you need a she'elat chacham, you need to undo the vow. Okay, so that's one possible way of reading it. Rava Amal is a more interesting answer, I think. Ha b'tamidei chachamim, ha ba'ama haaretz. Depends who you are. And now we get to a distinction that we made in a number of different circumstances, where we distinguish between those who are knowledgeable in Torah law and those who are not knowledgeable in Torah law. Haaretz are generally considered ignoramuses, right? Where they're maybe not in other things, but specifically in Torah law, they don't know a lot. Again, it's a phrase that's not exactly clear who we're referring to as people who don't know any better, as people who don't care so much, they're not careful about halacha. However we look at it, the issue is, if we go back to what we quoted in the Ran yesterday about, because this is a very commonplace type of vow, we're worried that they might take a vow on a davar and a door a different time and say, oh, well, if that one didn't need hatarat chacham, neither will this one. Well, then it's very easy to make this distinction between a tamid chacham and an haaretz. A tamid chacham knows the difference between davar ha'asor and davar and ador, right? Consider yourselves now. You've been learning Nedarim for already 13 days. This is basic information to you right now. You know, davar asor, davar and ador, there's a big difference between them. And if you make a neder and a davar and ador, it's a problem. If you make a neder and davar asor, it's not a problem. You wouldn't get confused by this. But if you hadn't learned Nedarim, right, you wouldn't know this. So therefore, you might confuse the two. And it would be logical. If I hadn't learned Nedarim, right, I would have assumed. I said, like, something that's forbidden, it would probably be a vow. So therefore, the concern for confusion would be only for an haaretz. So for him, we're going to make him do shelat chacham so he doesn't mess up the halacha in a different situation. But for tamid chacham, there's no need. That's if you go by the explanation we saw in the Ran, that we're worried they might mess up. Could be, we'll distinguish for other reasons. You know, they were more strict in general, possibly with haaretz, because they were worried. There are all sorts of things about them. But at tamid chacham, we're not so concerned. Right? Why we have tamidei chachamim making vows to their wives, negative kind of vows. Don't know the answer to that question, right? Again, tamidei chachamim means they know halacha, doesn't necessarily mean they're beyond, getting angry. They could still get angry and say things they don't mean. That could apply to anybody. But we're going to be more strict with the haaretz for whatever reason, right? Maybe they just, preferential treatment to their own. We see this sometimes, that there was preferential treatment to tamidei chachamim in certain situations also. It's another way to look at it. To which the Gemara says, we're going to prove to you that there's this concept of distinguishing between a tamid chacham and an haaretz in a similar situation. The Hatanya, doesn't it say in a braita, hanoder b'Torah lo amar klum? If someone takes a vow on a Sefer Torah, it's meaningless. We're going to talk about this in a minute. As soon as we turn to Amud Bet, they're going to quote the whole braita and we'll explain it. So right now, we don't really understand it so well yet. But Amar Rabbi Yochanan, even though it lo amar klum, sarich she'ela lechacham, you need to undo the vow. That would match kind of, right, this harei alai kebasar ima, right? You don't need lo amar klum. Our Mishna adds, kind of like in the same way Rabbi Yochanan added there, you need she'elat chacham though. And Rav Nachman v'tamid chacham eino tzarich she'ela. And Rav Nachman adds that the tamid chacham doesn't need she'ela. Okay, so that's exactly it. This requirement of she'ela that Rabbi Yochanan instituted, Rav Nachman comes and says, but it's not for a tamid chacham. Okay, I see that someone wrote, I don't know who wrote it, but that zugiyut, when it comes to relationships, you shouldn't have any hakalot for tamidei chachamim, and that's true. Again, I think if you understand this in the context of this is concern for halacha, not for vowing, but if you view it the way we saw it in the Ran, that the concern is they'll confuse which type of vow, and that we're not really worried tamidei chachamim will confuse. Right? If you go with the preferential treatment, it is quite difficult here. Why you would assume that? Again, maybe they assume, which is probably not necessarily a correct assumption. Maybe it's less common among tamidei chachamim, so there's less concern to make this, right? If we go back to what he said, it's a very commonplace, this type of thing. Maybe they thought that tamidei chachamim, it was less common among them to take these type of vows, which may be true, maybe not. We don't know. We're not living then. And maybe because of that. So there's all sorts of reasons that don't have to get us to the place where they say, oh, we don't care if tamidei chachamim treat their wives that way. I don't think anybody's really saying that. Okay. I'm a bit. Now we're going to get into this braita of hanoder b'Torah. We're going to raise a problem. There's 3 parts to the braita. We're going to raise a problem with the last line of the braita and give 3 different explanations of this braita. Hanoder b'Torah lo amar klum. And that's going to take us to the next mission. B'masha katuv ba, dvarav kayamim. If you say what it says in the Torah, then it's a valid neder. Before we move on to part 3, let's just discuss those two parts. If you make a vow, now some people think this is actually an oath, and it's kind of like an oath on a Sefer Torah, okay? And then it's something, it's not exactly a vow, it's an oath. There's a deliberation among the commentaries what exactly we mean here, even though it says neder, sometimes they say neder really means oath. I'm not going to get into that whole debate, but I want to stick to the simple reading here. But the main idea is you did something, an oath or a vow, on a Sefer Torah. Now, a Sefer Torah is made up of, we can view it as kind of two parts. There's the parchment, which is the book element of it. And then there's what's written in it, particularly what they're going to call it, azkarot sheba, the names of God in it. So theoretically, you could be vowing in the name of God, like we saw, ishkidor neder la Hashem, and then it would be a neder la Hashem, which would be a valid vow. If you're doing it on the book, then you're just doing a neder on a book. That's not a davar nador. It's not a language of a vow. It's not anything. So, hanoder b'Torah lo amar klum. So that's why if you're noder on the Torah, we basically assume you're doing it on the book itself, on the parchment, let's say, and that's nothing. B'masha katuvba, but if you say, and that's why some people say we're really talking about a shvua, because a shvua is something you do in the name of God. You make an oath in the name of God. So you can swear in the name of God. That would be dvarav kaimim. That would be a valid oath. If you say neder, you have to understand it as a neder b'shem Hashem. Ba ubamash katuvba. Now, if you add the word and you say ba and ubamash katuvba, then dvarav kayamim. Okay? Yeah. The Gemara is going to say, wait a minute. Katane in, right? So there's 3 parts. You're noder on the Torah, which is kind of like saying ba on this, on it. If you say bimash katuvba, with what's written in it, it's a valid vow, right? On the Torah itself is not. Bimash katuvba is. Ba'u b'mash katuvba, also it's a valid vow, to which the Gemara says, Katane b'mash katuvba dvarav kayami, ba'u b'mash katuvba tzarich lemeimah. If already I say the words b'mash katuvba, what it says inside here, it means it's a valid vow because I must be referring to the name of God. Well, if I add the word ba on this Torah and what's written in it, it shouldn't be any worse. So why does the braita need to tell me this? It's obvious, okay? So there's no point for that last line based on the second line. Just by adding an extra word ba, it's not going to make it any worse. So we're going to have 3 possible explanations about that last line, and each is a different type of answer. So let's look. I'm Rav Nachman, lo kashya. Okay, methodologically, we'll talk about the different methodologies they use here. We have to distinguish really between case 2 and case 3. B'mash katuvba dvarav kayamim, that's one case. Ba'u b'mash katuvba dvarav kayamim, if it's the same exact situation, then there's no need for that line, so it must be a different situation. So how do they say it? Again, the chart will help you if you have it in front of you. If machta, okay, one is where it's in your hand, one is if it's on the ground. Okay, Sefer Torah on the ground sounds weird, maybe it means on a table, you're not touching it, you're not holding it, you're kind of pointing at it. So that's ha demachta oraita ara. There is when the Torah is on the ground. Ha denakale biyade. And the other case is where it was in your hand. Which is which? Let's see. Machta ara, if it's on the ground, da'ate agvile. You must be referring to the parchment itself. First of all, you might not even see what's in it. You have to try to imagine their world. It's not like their Sefer Torah looked like, now if you had a Sefer Torah, it was obvious what it was. But let's say you had a parchment with some of the Torah written on it, or maybe all of the Torah, but it could be a parchment with something else written on it. So remember, they wrote everything almost on parchment. So you wouldn't even necessarily know it was a Torah, and it's not right in your hands. So maybe you're just referring to the parchment and saying, I'm taking this neder or shvua on this book. And then we say, so if it's ara, you must be referring to the parchment. And then, unless you said ba ubemash katuvba, it's not going to be an issue. In other words, once you say on this and what's written in it, then already we'll say that's going to be dvarav kayamim. But any less than that, if you just say b'mash katuvba, it won't work if it's on the ground. But nakale biyade, but if you're holding it in your hand, then we assume da'ate ala azkarot sheba, then you must be referring to God's name in it. And especially when you say the words, b'masha katuv ba, since you're holding it, you know it's a Torah. And therefore, when you say b'masha katuv ba, you mean God's name. But again, if it's on the ground, or like I said, maybe on a table, or just not right in front of you, so we might be meaning, right? If you say what it says inside, maybe you don't even know what's inside. Maybe it's some other book. Maybe it's not, right, God's name. Maybe there's no name of God in it. So therefore, only if you say vowed b'masha katuv ba, that's already a more meaningful statement. That's going to mean you must be referring to the name of God inside it. So this option is to basically what we call an ukimta, to say that each line in the Mishna, in the braita, is referring to a different case. Next. Second answer, Abaye and Raba. Demachta al ara. All the cases, forget the ukimta, okay? Or I would say forget the zigzag ukimta, to say that one is in one case and one is in another case, right? When it's hard to say that really, because it seems to be describing the same exact scenario, depending on your words are changing and not the situation is changing. So this one says it's an ukimta, but one ukimta for all three situations. And now they're going to say the following. It's on the ground, or again, maybe on a table, something, not in your arms. And hakamashmalan, it comes to teach you, even though it might be on the ground and it's not with you, since you said not, and this is how we explained it the first time, which is if you just say on this book, right, on this Torah, maybe you don't mean the name of God. But if, right, you say ba. But if you say b'masha katuv ba, you must be referring to what's inside it, even though it's on the ground, you're not holding it in your hand. It must be referring to the names of God. And then why ba u b'masha katuv ba does it work? That's unnecessary. To which the answer is, yes, it's unnecessary, but that doesn't bother us. Because zovein sarich lomar zo katani. It's a structure of a Mishna that we've seen many times, which is this, and I don't even need to tell you this case, it's obvious, but I'll tell it to you anyway. It's kind of similar to what we said earlier with the chulin, right? That it's not really necessary, but they're going to tell it to you anyway. So basically, it's the structure of, let's tell you the more unique case. Even if you only say b'masha katuv ba, it will work as a neder. And ba'u b'masha katuv ba also works, obviously, because all you did was add a word. It's obvious, but we're going to tell it to you anyway. The Abaye and Raba, I see someone's asking, why is it on the ground? It's not that it necessarily needs to be on the ground. It's just a matter of, if I'm going to take a neder on a Torah, is it in my arms or is it not in my arms? It's really what it means when they say on the ground. They just mean you're not holding it in your hands. If you're not holding it in your hands, you're already distanced from it, and maybe you don't know what it says inside, or maybe when you talk about it, you're referring to it more from a distance and you don't really mean what's written in it. You mean more as a book itself. Again, one could argue it's hard to understand really the difference, and that's why they're struggling with, is there a difference, is there not a difference, etc., what the cases are. So this methodology is to basically answer the question by saying there's really no question. Who cares if it's unnecessary? The Mishna sometimes lists things that are unnecessary. So the first was to say different types of scenarios, okay? One is in one case, one is in a different case, which is hard to say according to the simple reading. Second is to say, yeah, it's not really necessary, but they say it anyway. The third is a different type of approach entirely. Abaye and Raba, alternatively, you could say, and here the language is a little strange. Many people change it, get rid of it, but I'll read it, what it says, and then we'll explain it a little better. Kula mitziata nami denaket lebiyade. It doesn't mean kula, the whole thing, and it doesn't mean mitziata, which is the middle case, so it doesn't mean either of those. What it really means is that the third, this is kind of like the first in a sense that each one's describing a different situation. But the last line, ba u b'masha katuv ba, which was the difficult line, is denaket lebiyade, when it's in your arms. Okay, so the first two cases are when it's on the ground. In which case, again, however you define on the ground, which means if you say ba Torah, ba by itself, it's not going to work. We're going to assume you're talking about just the gvil, the parchment. If you say b'masha katuv ba, you must mean God's name, and then it's valid. When we now say ba'u b'masha katuv ba, the new reading is, it must be in your arms. Okay, you're holding it. And then they're saying the following. Kevan, it's coming to teach you. Kevan denaket lebiyade, af agab de lo amar ela ba, kimanda amar b'masha katuv badami. How they say something different? It's not, and this is why I say it's a different methodology, because it's true, it's giving different ukimtot. That's true. But the chiddush here is, don't read it as vowed b'ma shekatuv ba. Just like we suggested before with the chulin, it's also similar. Don't read it as chulin she'ochalach is case 1 and kibasar chazir is case 2. Read it as kibasar chazir is like chulin. Read ba, vowed b'ma shekatuv ba as ba, in this case, when you're holding it, if you say the word ba, which normally wouldn't mean you're talking about God's name in it, in this case, it's like, if you're holding it in your arms, it's like you said b'ma shekatuv ba in the other case. In other words, in the other case, we distinguish between ba and b'ma shekatuv ba. It's on the ground, ba doesn't count, b'ma shekatuv ba counts. If you're holding it in your hands, ba is like ma shekatuv ba. And then it's not like we have case 1, ba, case 2, b'ma shekatuv ba, and case 3, ba plus b'ma shekatuv ba, and it's a longer sentence. No, it's actually back to case 1 in a different scenario, and it's saying in this case, ba will be the same as b'ma shekatuv ba, and it will be a neder. So that's a different approach to basically reinterpret what it even says in the Mishna. Forget about an ukimta, which it also does, but it's also saying that's not, don't read it as it looks. Ba means, ba b'ma shekatuv ba means ba is like, as if you said b'ma shekatuv ba, even though all you said was ba. Okay, so that was 3 different interpretations about how to read this braita, and we only got there because we brought the braita to show this idea of distinguishing between Talmidei Chachamim and Abaye and Raba and requiring she'elah for a neder that really isn't the valid Torah neder, and that would be hanoder b'Torah. By Torah law is not a neder. That everyone, right? That no matter how we explained is not a neder. And then again, unless you say it was in your hands, according to interpretation 3, then it would count. But in a basic case where either it's on the ground or in the first 2 answers, the first 2 explanations, it was anytime you say ba, it doesn't count. That wouldn't count by Torah law, but the rabbis require she'elah chacham for an haaretz, not for talmid chacham. And then we're going to say the same is true in our scenario. Okay, where that was Rava's explanation of our Mishnah, which was to say how to reconcile the Mishna and the braita, that it's just that the rabbis required it specifically for Abaye and Raba, not for Talmidei Chachamim. Moving on to the next Mishnah, which we're not going to fully understand today. There's a lot of questions to be asked about this Mishnah. We'll get to more in depth about it tomorrow. There's different ways to understand it. But start with the Mishnah, then we'll bring a machloket and moraim, which tomorrow will connect with our Mishnah, not today. Konam she'ani Hashem. Konam is the language of a neder. That I will sleep, meaning sleep will be forbidden to me. Shani medaber, speaking will be forbidden to me. Shani mahalech, walking will be forbidden to me. Haomer li sha konam shani mishamshech, he says to his wife, it will be forbidden to me that I will have relations with you. Harei ze b'lo yachel dvaro. These things, now really, they're not really languages of neder because they're a language of isur gavra, right? It's forbidden to me to do something that ein bo mamash. Remember, but the Mishnah comes and says, this is bal yachel dvaro, you have to keep this, okay? Now, the Gemara is going to say only by rabbinic law. Again, as I said, we'll wait till we get to the Gemara later to understand this case better, okay, and why this is forbidden. But now comes the Gemara and quotes a machloket between a moraim. It's a bit of a confusing case, but not so, but a little bit. Okay, itbar. Itbar means machloket and moraim. Konam einai b'shena hayom im eshan lemachal. Sounds a little confusing, but let's get it. Forbidden to me will be my eyes to sleep today. Okay, meaning today, the neder is about today. I will not sleep today, but under one condition. What condition? Im ishan lemachal. If I sleep tomorrow, then I'm vowed against sleep for today. Now it's very confusing because there's 2 parts to this. There's the neder, the vow, and there's the condition. The condition is if I don't sleep tomorrow, then there will be a neder, but the neder will be on today. So now it's confusing. What do I do today? Can I sleep or can I not sleep? So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Al Yishan Hayom, Shema Yishan Lemachal. Don't sleep today, because if you sleep today and then tomorrow you end up sleeping, then it turns out you actually went against your neder today. So to prevent that from happening, right, we're worried that you might end up sleeping tomorrow. Now, theoretically, and this is what Rav Nachman is going to say, Rav Nachman says the opposite. Yishan hayom, sleep today. If If you sleep today, then you'll make sure not to sleep tomorrow, because you know that if you sleep tomorrow, you'll have retroactively gone against your neder today. So we'll understand this a little bit better when we bring the flip case right now. Umode Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda admits though, meaning he agrees with Rav Nachman about the following. Be'omil konam enai b'shena lemachal imashana yom. If I sleep today, then tomorrow I'm taking a vow, and I won't, right? My vow will be on tomorrow. In that case, shishana yom. There's no problem to sleep today, even according to Rav Yehuda. Why? Because kilo, I'm moving into Tet Vav right now, kilo mizdaher bitzna'a, aval b'isura mizdaher. As I said, there's two parts. There's the condition and there's the neder. If I sleep today, then tomorrow I'll be forbidden. When tomorrow comes and I've already slept today, right, yesterday, it turns out, and I've already slept, right, from my perspective, it'll be yesterday. If I already slept yesterday, then I know that today my neder is there. And then I know I have to keep my neder. Even Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned that tomorrow I'll accidentally go against my neder. For that, we're not worried about. Since my condition was fulfilled, right, it's either was fulfilled or not. If it wasn't fulfilled, then it's not a problem, right? But if it was fulfilled, meaning I slept today, then I have to make sure tomorrow not to sleep. I'll worry about that because since my condition was filled today, I did the condition, I slept. That means now, tomorrow, I'm forbidden to sleep. I'll be very careful. But if I say, today is my neder, if tomorrow my condition, and if I fulfill the condition tomorrow, comes Rav Yehuda and he says, even if I end up sleeping today, since today was the day of the neder, and tomorrow is just the fulfillment of the condition, I might not be careful about that. If the neder is already chal, like in the second case, obviously I'll be careful to keep my neder. But if the neder isn't yet, because right tomorrow hasn't come yet, and it's only if I fulfill my condition, we might be concerned that a person might not be careful about not fulfilling the condition, since the neder day already passed. So therefore, right, he says we have to worry. Rav Nachman says, no, it's one and the same, really, because basically you'll go against your neder if you fulfill your condition today, and therefore people are going to be very careful. And that's the machloka between them. Do we distinguish or do we not distinguish between the neder and the t'nai, right? But again, they all agree that if the condition is on the first day and then the neder will either yes or not apply in the second day, we don't care what you do that first day. You'll just be fulfilling your condition and then your neder will apply, and then it's just like a regular neder. So it doesn't matter. It's this weird case where your neder retroactively will be put into place if you fulfill some condition tomorrow. Then comes Rav Yehuda and says you better be careful today so that you don't make a mistake and accidentally fulfill the condition tomorrow, which we are concerned you might do, according to Rav Yehuda anyway. Therefore, don't do it today. And Rav Nachman says we're not worried. Soon, we're going to get back to what this has to do with our Mishna, and that we'll get to tomorrow. And as I said, understanding the Mishna better. With that, we'll finish for today. Have a great day, everyone.